competence from those who have to undertake specific functions in relation to their line mandate. Panel also proposes the establishment of the National Land Rights Protector for managing high-level conflict, especially between the state and the citizens. The view of government is that what the proposed recommendation seeks to address may be covered in the expanded mandate of the land courts legislation that the panel itself proposed in its recommendation that it must be done. And if I may indicate, this is the work that already the IMC had instructed the Ministry of Justice together with departments of land to undertake, to look at the current land claims court and see whether or not such legislation should not be broadly expanded to include all land-related matters. And in our view is that that process will then accommodate the concerns of the panel in this regard. The panel recommended that government should create a land reform fund. The view of government is that the currently may not be merit in setting up of such a fund, because in our view, the optimum and judicious use of current budget allocation can still address the required resources for land reform. The other recommendation from the panel is that there must be an establishment of a land and agrarian reform agency. Our view as government is that the new configuration of the department, which now combines land and agriculture and rural development, does address the concerns that the panel might have had when they made this recommendation. The other recommendation related to the land tax inquiry, which is being proposed by the panel. The view of government is that actually such an inquiry was done in the late 1990s, mid-2000. And this inquiry, actually, it's what brought to a legislation in the Municipal Structures Act that relates to the property rates legislation, as well as the capital gains tax. And therefore, at the moment, government's view is that there may not be a need for such a land tax inquiry. In the discussion, Cabinet noted that there are some of the recommendations which may require further work, such as the recommendation that the panel have proposed on the land ceiling. The panel says consideration should be given on the imposition of land ceiling to limit the total area of land that any one individual or company of land ownership, which is antithetical to land reform. Such ceiling must be varied across agroecological zones. The state must be empowered in law to compulsory acquire surplus land and to determine which land is required for redistribution. While as government, we note the intent and the spirit of this recommendation, we are of the view that further work would need to be done, particularly that the panel itself, in the body of the report, they do indicate the difficulty that is accompanied by any proposition of the land ceiling and its application. And also, if you take the agroecological zone of our country, where the agricultural vegetation as well as your rain patterns are not the same anywhere in the country, and therefore to determine a land ceiling, what may be small scale in the region like KZN around Umgeni River, if I were to make an example, where the land is fertile and you have access to water resources. What is small scale there cannot be small scale in the same extent and size in the Northern Cape, which is very arid and dry. And therefore, to actually have an application where you would have to determine land ceiling in the country may not actually be viable at this point in time. And therefore, the view of government is that this is just amongst one of those recommendations where further work may be required. And I think this is comprehensive enough just to give you the flavor of those recommendations, where the state have actually felt, you know, we may not agree with them in its entirety, and also some of them which we think there is further work that is required. Obviously, on those, as I said earlier, where we are agreeing work is being undertaken, such as the beneficiary selection policy, which the cabinet have approved, and the Department of Land Affairs will be releasing it for comment. It actually deals with the issue of transparency in terms of land allocation. We are also working on the donations policy, which will then guide those who would want to donate land. The issue of inclusivity in terms of ensuring that we deal with spatial planning, again, that has been addressed. The National Spatial Development Framework has actually been released for comment, and I think it does address that issue. And also in the way in which government is looking at targeting land for residential purposes, for housing in particular, will address some of those recommendations that are being made. Thank you very much, Reggie, and to all of you here in Pretoria and in Cape Town.
Thank you very much, Minister. Colleagues, there it is. We'll take a round of questions. Let's start with Pretoria. Any